ko Erin tona whanawa, no Aotearoa, rātou, kia tātou, e tēnei, kia ora. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, katoa.
Kia ora. Welcome, thank you for having us. So greetings to you all. As Marama said, my name is Erin and this is Marama Pocock. So we come from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and just acknowledging everybody present. Thank you for having us. As you've already heard, I'm the National Coordinator and Trainer for Specialist Child Interviewing with New Zealand Police. So I've worked in various roles in child protection since about 2006, and I began my child interviewing career in 2011. In 2016, I took on the coordinator role with the police. So I'm very passionate about giving children a voice, making justice accessible to all our vulnerable witnesses, and working together to make the process a more positive experience for these victims. As you heard, last year we had the privilege of delivering specialist child interviewing training in Vanuatu. We met so many amazing people and saw so much dedication to making things better for children and vulnerable victims while we were there. And the learnings that we gained ourselves in Vanuatu have actually impacted how I trained in New Zealand. I just ran our training course last week and made quite a lot of changes just from my learnings in Vanuatu. We feel honoured to be invited to present and be part of this workshop this week, and we hope that our sessions will start conversations and child interviewing practice development in your own areas.
So morning, good morning. Thank you very much for having us here to speak. As Erin said, we're very excited to be here. I've been a specialist child interviewer for the last 17 years and a New Zealand police officer for the last 27, so making me feel very old really. So I came into the child interviewing arena from an investigation background. I did my detective training back in 2001. And when I came onto the child protection team, I came as an investigator. But when I saw my first child interview, it was a bit of a light bulb moment really, because it brought in the investigation side of things. But I also had a psychology degree specialising in child development, so it sort of brought the two things together for me. And that's been my core role in the police since that time. And I also do the interviews with adult victims or survivors of abuse as well. And I work with Erin sometimes with the training and mentoring of child interviewers, which I love that work. And yeah, really excited to have done the Vanuatu training and to be here today to be part of this workshop. So hopefully some of the information we share can help you with your own work. So thank you.
Okay. So today we're going to look at two learning points. We'll spend time looking at why it might be hard for children who have been abused to talk. And then we'll spend time exploring the practical things that we can do to help our child victims tell us what happened. So within this, we will introduce you to a model of child interviewing. We'll also talk about some good interviewing techniques and about the importance of ongoing training and development for your specialist interviewers. You'll notice the image of a hand holding a piece of paper at the bottom of the slide. So as we've only got an hour with you, and it's in the training session format, we thought that we would provide you with some additional information that you can read later. So if you see a slide with that image, that means there's some corresponding information in your handouts. Sorry. Okay. So in New Zealand, tamariki or children are seen as taonga, precious gifts. But despite this, we have an issue. So in the year ending 31 March 2023, there were 69,500 reports of concern for children made to Tamariki, which is our child welfare protection agency. On average, one child is killed in New Zealand every 5 months. So those are sobering statistics. Because of the prevalence of abuse in New Zealand, we've worked hard to create a good system for dealing with the cases when they come to us. Police child protection teams and Ōranga Tamariki, so as I said, that's our Ministry for Children, child welfare system. We work together every time there is a report of suspected child abuse. That includes sexual abuse and physical abuse. So in New Zealand, it's illegal to use any form of physical discipline against the child, or cases of serious neglect. Our interviewers are all from police or social workers from Ōranga Tamariki, so they're both in the role. All our interviewers go through the same initial training and ongoing development program. So today we're looking forward to sharing with you how we do things in New Zealand. We're not here to tell you how you must do things, but hopefully some of our experiences might be able to help you in your development processes for talking with children.
So there are many challenges we face or children face when talking about abuse, and we can't cover all of those challenges today, but we're just going to focus on these 3 here. So when we say cognitive, we're talking about the child's ability or skill to talk about the abuse and to think about it, and they're thinking and they're talking. When we say the social and emotional, we're talking about the child's family and social situation. So thinking about things like whether they're in a remote village or whether they're on the mainland, whether the suspected offender lives in their own home, if there's someone close to them, or that maybe someone who's important in their community. When we say contextual, we're talking about the child interview itself and how that's very different from how children's normal experience in everyday life. So all of these things impact on how well a child can tell us about what has happened to them. So when we say cognitive, we're thinking about things like this, so the language, memory, communication and understanding. And as that line shows, these things all develop and improve as children grow. Even children as young as 3 can tell us about abuse and what has happened to them, but they obviously can't use many words or give us much detail. But as children get older, they can tell us more about what happened and give us details like when it happened, where it happened, and how often that sort of thing is happening. So experiencing abuse and trauma can slow and delay the development of some or all of these areas, as we heard yesterday from Dr. AJ. So the children we work with have obviously experienced abuse and or trauma, and it's very likely we will come across developmental delays and differing abilities in these areas. Sometimes children, when they talk about the trauma, they will regress or appear younger, use younger language and behaviour than what they would when you met them before the interview. And that's really normal for children who have been abused. We're now going to look at some of the specific language issues that we face when we're speaking with children who have been abused.
Okay, so I'm just going to have a quick look at the meaning. So young children sometimes use the same word to mean lots of different things. So for example, very young children might use the word doggy to refer to any animal with 4 legs until they come to understand that different animals are called different names. This is called overextension. I just want to share a little example that I noticed with my daughter. She's now 6, but when she was 5, she always kind of used words that I guess that were above her age level. She started using the word embarrassed a lot, and so when she was upset about something, she would start crying and say, "I feel so embarrassed." And then when she was upset with her brother, she'd stand on the floor and say, "I'm so embarrassed with you." And then in the middle of the night, when she had a nightmare, she'd come into my bed and then she'd start crying and she'd say, "I feel so embarrassed," basically meaning scared. So, I came to realise that the word embarrassed for her meant a big emotion, but not necessarily what embarrassed means.
too many buttons.
Even older children and teenagers can use words incorrectly or not understand what we mean when we use words. So for example, in a study of older children who were asked what common legal terms meant, many made mistakes or gave completely unrelated definitions. So for example, an allegation lives in a swamp and can eat you, or a court is somewhere you can play basketball, and jury is a necklace like mum has. These children in the study had all had significant contact with the court system, and they were up to 11 years old. So, as we can see, even common words children might have might not realise what they mean. Theory of mind is another difficult idea that takes children time to master. So this is the belief young children had that others know everything that they know. So children who don't have a good ground of theory of mind will not be able to understand that others think, feel, or know, or want different things to them. So if we take a look at the picture, I think this helps explain the concept. So we can see here Denzel is having a phone call with his father in a different location. And Dad says, hey, what are you up to? What are you doing, Denzel? And Denzel holds up his toy train and says, I'm playing with this. So he hasn't developed theory of mind. He doesn't know that Dad doesn't know everything he does. So when we're interviewing children, we need to think about whether they understand that we don't know. Some children may not have developed theory of mind until they're around 8 years old. And again, if we think about the fact that our children have experienced abuse, trauma, it's quite likely that this may be older before they ever started to develop a theory of mind. I'll hand back to Marama.
Okay, so what does this mean for us with child interviewing? So in a child interview, we need to check the child's meaning of certain words and make sure they understand the words we are using. So an example with what Erin's just told about her daughter using the word embarrassed, a really good question would be, what do you mean by the word embarrassed? So we try to use very simple and clear language when talking with children so that they can understand us. And children also need to be told that we don't know what's happened and we need their help to figure out what has happened. We sometimes need to remind children of that several times throughout the interview. Okay, so one way we can help children in an interview is to help their memory retrieval or help the child get to the memories or the information they have stored. We don't have time to talk about how memory works today, but it is really important with interviewing that we understand the difference of episodic or script memory. So episodic memory is what happened at a particular time, so like an individual event, whereas script or semantic memory is about understanding what usually happens. So script memories are really important for our development and growth as they help us make sense of the world around us. And they teach us what to expect and what will likely happen. An example of script memory is telling someone about how you normally get to work in the morning. Whereas an example of episodic memory would be telling someone about going to work that morning and seeing a robbery on the way to work. So in interviews about child abuse, we want to focus on episodic memory. We want to know about the individual times that things happened. This is really important for getting the specific details about the offence and being able to lay individual charges. It's also important for getting that corroborative evidence. So a child might talk about certain things that happened before, during or after the offence, and these might be things that we can corroborate or prove have happened. So to help us understand the two different memories better, we're going to watch a couple of videos. And in the videos, the child Freya is talking to her mother about general birthday parties versus going to her friend Kelsey's birthday party.
It is a good way to see the difference with a child using words like I'll think about it so we can explain it, but yeah, so perhaps we'll move on and hopefully we can come back with more watch that and I'll talk about what you saw. Okay. So now we're going to take a look at the way social and emotional factors may affect how a child feels about talking. So there are lots of different theories or ideas that try to explain how the world someone lives in and experiences they have impacts on how they think, feel, and act. In New Zealand, we sometimes use a model called the Whare Tapawhā, which uses the symbol. Has anyone heard of this? No, okay. So this uses the symbol of a whare or a house to think about the health and happiness of an individual person or child. So the idea is that there are 4 sides that hold up the house for the person. So each of these sides represents something different. So we have family, emotional, spiritual, and physical health and well-being. So when all 4 sides are strong, the person will be feeling, we can assume that the person will be feeling well and strong within themselves. But if one or more of these sides becomes less strong, this will affect the person's balance and their well-being. So we'll just think back to AJ's presentation on trauma-informed practice yesterday. An important part of working with victims of sexually violent offending is to think about how the assault has affected them as a person. So when planning for an interview, think about the family and social situation the child is in. For example, as Marama mentioned, are they in a village or a township? Is the alleged offender someone close to them? Maybe they lived in their home, or someone who's very important in the community. Do they have support of adults around them, or are they isolated? So if we apply this Whare Tapawhā to Mele, the case study, before she went to her uncle's house, she may have had all 4 walls supporting her well, and she might have felt strong and had good health within herself. After she moved to her uncle's house and the abuse started, things would have changed for her. So Mele might have suffered physical harm from her uncle's abuse. That ward starts to rash a little bit, I suppose. She was disconnected from her parents, so her safe family. Imagine her worries about her own safety and the emotional harm that she experienced when her auntie got mad when she tried to tell about the abuse. So what do we think? That Mele's body would be standing like after the abuse? Would she be strong, stable? Sort of crumbling in areas. And so given that, we can expect that Mele might feel reluctant to talk about the abuse they had. There are lots of reasons children might show reluctance. We've just talked about some of the reasons with Mele. And lots of the other presenters here have also touched on reasons why children might find it hard to talk. It will take us hours to look at all the different possible reasons and the emotional impacts of abuse. So we've given you a handout with just some more reasons for reluctance. The reason for this is it would be a really good idea to consider these as part of your planning when you're going to interview children. I'll explain a little bit more about this as we go through. So sometimes reluctance can be seen and sometimes it's not. So we might see in an interview children saying things like, I don't know, I can't tell you, it's too hard to talk about, talking about a lot of unimportant things or changing the subject. All of these signs are normal, and we need to think about ways to manage them during our interviews. The other thing to remember is that we might see these at any point in our interactions with children. So before the interview, during the interview, or even after the interview. But for example, if a child is saying it's too hard to talk about, telling the child you understand, and that many children find it hard to do these talks, may be enough to just help them through those emotions and get to the point where they can start talking with you. This is called managing rapport. We often think of rapport as something that's at the beginning of an interview and then, yes, we've got good rapport, now we're good to go. But actually it's something that ebbs and flows throughout our interactions with the child. And so if we need to be looking for signs of reluctance during the interview And so then we can think about ways to manage them as the interviewer. And you can do this in many simple ways. So even just something as simple as offering a break if you see that a child starts to look a bit overwhelmed. Offering a glass of water, some tissues if they become a little bit emotional. If things were moving, if the child was using avoidance as a sort of sign of reluctance, so she, if you think about Millie, for example, remember her cousins had also been abused by her uncle. I think she talked about that he was using harm against auntie and cousins. So perhaps in the interview, as a way of avoiding talking about herself, she continues to talk about the harm to her cousins. We can say something like, we can talk more about what happened with your cousins, but right now, I'm really interested to hear more about what happened to you. So we just acknowledge what they said and that it's important, so we're still hearing them, but redirect them through to the topic we want to talk about. And that's quite a simple technique you can use to just sort of reassure but gently guide back to the topic that's important. Often children cry in interviews, they even sob. And this is okay, and a really normal response. Allow them space to do this. Don't jump in and try to make it okay. Just sit back and allow them space. Let them know that you're still there. Sometimes I'll do things like say, it's okay, just take your time, have some water, and when you're ready, tell me all about what happened. So just be with them in the space. Don't feel the need to make it okay, because the abuse wasn't okay. So let them feel that emotion. If you see them become too distressed, and I have personally stopped 2 interviews in my interview career when I believe the child became too distressed. They were sobbing for quite a long time, and every time they went to talk, they couldn't get the words out. And I knew that the child was safe, and they were in a different home now, and so I just said to her that I thought maybe we should come back another day, and she did, and we did that talk. So, but most of the time you can just carry on. Now something, I guess anecdotally from our perspective, is even though children do often get upset before during these talks, in our experience they almost always say that they feel better at the end because they've been able to talk about it and they feel like they've been listened. So I think it's perhaps not our process that is making me feel so upset, that it's what happened and the thought of the time. I'll hand back to Marama after I gave that very lengthy comment.
So when we talk about contextual, so contextual is when we think about the interview and how it's very different for children from their everyday experiences. So from birth, children are taught how to act and behave and talk with adults. They've shown that adults are the boss and that they already know everything. Even when you think about simple parent-child interactions, the child sees the parent as the expert. So think about reading a book with a child. You might say, what colour is that flower? And the child knows that you already know the colour. So they see it almost as a test for them. But children also like to please adults, so they might not know the answer, but they might guess or try to come up with the right answer just to please them, even when they don't know. And in fact, we often don't let children say they don't know something. If you think about, like in a home situation, if a couple pot was broken and the mother says, who broke my pot? And the child says, I don't know. They're likely to get in trouble. The mother will say, well, you do know who broke it. And likewise at school, if a teacher asks them a maths problem and the child said, I don't know, the teacher's likely to say, well, give it a go, make a go at coming up with an answer. But in a child interview, we're asking them to undo all of that knowledge they have of talking with adults, and actually the child is leading the conversation, the child is the expert, and we're asking them to tell us if they don't know something, because we don't want them to guess or make anything up. So it's very different from a normal interaction that a child would have with an adult. So how can we help? Because obviously this is a very different setting for a child to be in. So one of the things we can do is think about the space where we interview children. And what we need to think about is somewhere that's really quiet, where it's private, where it's safe for children. And we need to think about that not just for a child interviews, but any time we're talking with with children. So prosecutors and things like that, any of those meetings with children, you need the same sort of things in place. We also need to think about how we present ourselves to children, because if you think about it, if you ask a child what does the police do, they will often say they put people in jail. And we're talking about children who potentially love or care for the offender. They don't want to get them in trouble or make them go to jail. That is a real worry for the children we talk to. And they also don't want to get into trouble themselves. So that is something to remember. So when we interview the children, as a police officer, we won't wear a uniform, and we will say to the children that they are not in any trouble and that our job is to help them tell us about what happened. That's how we introduce ourselves to them. So we don't say that we're the police or we're a social worker, we just tell them that is our job. And then just thinking about the interview space, if you look up here, the picture on the left is our interview room in Dunedin, and the one on the right, the Oliver will recognise, is the room in Nadi. You will notice in this room here there's lots of toys, which is great for a waiting area, but actually interview you need to take one of those toys out because it'd be too distracting for children who would actually have trouble getting them to focus on what they're here to talk about. So make sure the room is free from distractions, so you're not wanting to be taking phone calls or having other people coming into the room. It has to be a really quiet space. And think creatively in your own workplace about where would be a good space. Even like a schoolroom after school hours could be an option, but always try and avoid doing it in the child's own home. And make sure there's a supportive adult nearby for the child, but not in the interview room, which we'll talk about later. So in the interview room, it's just the interviewer and the child. Some other things to consider, I think Paula touched on it yesterday with your child with the handkerchief, but yeah, thinking about things that they can have in their hand, just like a soft toy or fidget toy, that sort of thing. Doesn't have to be anything expensive or fancy, even a handkerchief will do. Timeliness is something to consider. Obviously for the child, the earlier the better for their memory. And also to reduce the risk of the child being coached or told what to say by other family members, the alleged suspect, even any other community or social pressures they might be under. Make sure the child is obviously having food and drink and rest. It's easy when something traumatic happens for those things to be overlooked, and we do sometimes have children coming for an interview who haven't slept all night, they haven't had breakfast, that sort of thing. So if that happens, you want to reschedule it so it's the right time for the child. And we'll often have some food in our interview suite too if they arrive hungry that we can give them. Consider if the child needs an interpreter, because if they have any language difficulties, communication difficulties, we need to address that as well to make sure that we understand them and they can understand us. And we've sort of touched on this earlier, but also speak to the child about any worries they have. So if we can address that before we start the interview, and it might be an easy fix about what they're worrying about. So always ask them before the interview if they have any particular worries. And as I said, make sure the space is safe, well away from the suspected offender. So you don't want it that they're coming in for an interview at the same time. You want to be well away from the child, and not with. You don't do the interview at the place where the abuse occurred either. So up here is a photo of an interview room, and the middle picture there is a picture of the monitor room. So in New Zealand, we record all our interviews on DVD, and we always have a second person monitoring the interview. So that's called the monitor. So they sit in this little room and they're watching it on the screen. And they're like a backup person, really. So they're making sure the equipment's working, taking notes, and they're making sure everything's covered evidentially that we need for the interview. Now, we noted in the regional guidelines, part 2 of the regional guidelines, one way we can minimise trauma is by reducing the number of times the child has to tell what happened. And by recording it this way, they only have to tell us one time. So our DVDs can be played as the child's evidence in court. So that's another really good reason to have it recorded. and the information is also shared without a rangatanga repeat. We know it's not always possible to have access to that video recording, so think about some other ways that you can record what the child is saying so that they don't have to say it at one time. And that might be thinking about using a phone or a dictaphone or any other device. Or, as I talked about, a monitor. You could have a second colleague taking notes so that they're capturing everything the child says in the child's own words. Because it's really important not just to summarise what the child says, we want their exact words, and also what questions the interviewer used, because we'll see that that is also a really important part of this role.
And I suppose just on that is, remember earlier we talked about the sort of power dynamic between a child and an adult. What can happen if you're sitting taking notes is the child starts to learn that only when you take notes that's the important information. So they might start to tailor their information and leave things out because that is not important. They also might become more focused on what you're writing. And it just sort of reinforces that idea of us as the expert without getting paper, and the child is the learner. Yeah. So we don't take notes in New Zealand during the interview because we have our monitor and and even if your interviews, if you're in a situation where legally you can't play them in court at this stage, it's if you can record them and even try to stay them up later based on listening to that, you're going to be far more accurate with the child's words and that sort of thing. So that could be something you do in the interim, if it is possible that you move to the interviews being recorded and played as evidence in the children. So just food for thought, yeah.
I think just to add to that too, it means that you're just focusing on the child, so it's helping that rapport. If you think about taking a statement and if you're looking at writing it and looking up it, it really impacts on that rapport with the child. So definitely get it to a colleague if you can't record it yourself.
So as I mentioned earlier, in New Zealand we've developed we use a model of child interview. So this is based on the PILON model, which you might have heard of. And the techniques that we use within the PILON model are based on the NICHD protocol, which is a well-researched international model for forensically interviewing children. So we've given you a handout with more information. Now you'll notice it says Fiji Specialist Child Interview, which is probably our era. This is the model that we used with the team in Vanuatu. But I think if it can be changed and adapted to suit, so it's not the Fiji model, it's our mistake. And so I'm just going to quickly run through the sections, but you've got more information in the handout. So planning and prep, we've talked quite a lot about planning and prep. That's just making sure that we have one shot with this child, so we really want to make sure that we've done all of that planning and preparation work beforehand. So we've got a good space, we know as much as we can about that child. It's in a timely way for them. We've got the right support person, that kind of stuff. And then we move into engage and explain. So as Marama said, we conduct our interviews with just the child and the interviewer in the room. So part of this phase is ensuring that everyone is comfortable and then separating the child from the caregiver. So often we'll do a quick show around so that the child and caregiver know where each other will be. And then we take the child and we give them a bit of information about what to expect. And so this might seem a little bit unusual to separate a child from their caregiver, but actually children might find it quite difficult to give the amount of detail that we're asking in front of their family. And also, we don't know all of the dynamics, and so it may be that while that caregiver seems supportive, their presence might be influencing what or how much the child feels like they can say. So we just separate them, and because our interviews are played in court, that also ensures that the whole process is transparent. There's no other influences in that room. Once we start the interview, the engage and explain phase covers all the legal requirements for the interview to be admissible, and we also include a practice talk, which I won't go into today because we're running out of time, but there is a lot of research supporting doing that and doing that well before you get into the account phase. Now the account phase, this is where the child is asked what they've come to talk about, and they're encouraged to tell in their own words everything they know about what has happened to them. We then do a short range and frequency where we try and get a sense of the types of offences we're dealing with and the extent of it. So are we talking about a one-off incident, 2 or 3 incidents, or abuse spanning sort of 5 years or something like that. So we just ask a few questions to try and get a sense so that we can then plan the rest of our interview. And after that we go into each of the identified incidents and we go through that from the start to the finish, trying to get as much detail from the child as we can. Then we would take a short break. We would go and check with our monitor to see any information that's perhaps missing, because it's a hard task being in that room and listening to everything, having your investigative mind working as well. So it's great to take a team approach and have a monitor next door who can just be focusing on just the content. You're watching the child's emotions, all that other stuff that you're doing in there. So we go and check with the monitor. Is everything straight? Have we just any bits? And often we go back in with a few more parts to explore. And then once we're satisfied that we've got all of the information that we're going to be able to get, then we move into a closure phase, which is just finishing things off, doing any legal requirements, and then we talk about a neutral subject with the child, and that just helps move them away from that yucky content into something more neutral. So in my evaluation, I shouldn't forget that because it's very important. So following the interview, the child's information is passed to both our investigating officer and police, and also to Oranga Tamariki, just a summary of the information, so that they can make decisions around the care and protection of the child. If the matter proceeds to court, the interview will be reviewed to make sure it meets the legal requirements. And as interviewers, part of our role is to make sure that we're evaluating our own interviews so that we can continue to improve it and see if we are slipping in our skills. So in my experience, the model is a really helpful tool to guide the structure of our interviews, but who can take a guess on what the most important thing in interviewing would be? Any guesses? Ask good questions. Okay, so in New Zealand we use 5 questions, 5 different types of questions in our interviews. And we think of them as sitting on a traffic light, which is actually just a jump bar. We think about the green at the top being the best questions to use. And then we move into orange, direct and closed questions, which we use with caution, and then into the red questions, leading questions, stop and only use if you need to. So research has shown that the questions at the top of the traffic light will give the most accurate and reliable information. Now, although all these questions have their place in an investigative interview, today, and I'll give you a quick definition of each, but today we are going to focus on open invitations and queued invitations, as these are the ones I want to use most in our interviews. These are also the best questions to use if you are talking to children in court. Alright. So open invitations. Remember how we talked about the cognitive challenges regarding language and comprehension for children? We also talked about how children will answer whatever we ask of them, try to make a guess, be good for adults, and rely on adults to already know the answer. Because of these reasons, children are very open to suggestibility or being led into particular answers. So one way we can mitigate this risk, is by using invitational questions. So open invitations are very simple questions that ask the child to tell us more. So things like, tell me more about that. What else can you tell me? So when you ask an open invitation, you're basically saying, keep talking, I'm interested. And you're not telling the child what to talk about. So open invitations let the child talk about extra information that the interviewer may not have asked them about. These questions are child-led, which means they have the least interviewer input. This minimises, as I said, the risk of suggestibility. And a child can answer in any way they choose, and they're choosing the information which to them is the most important or salient about the offending. Queued invitations use the child's own words to ask for more information. So they're very similar to open invitations, except that we use a cue from what the child's already told us and ask them to tell more about that part. For example, if Millie has just told us that her uncle touched her, we might say, tell me more about the touching, or describe the touching. These questions are also child-led and have minimal interviewer input, although a little bit more interviewer input than by invitations. They're regarded as good interviewing questions internationally, which minimise suggestibility and often produce good quality and longer responses for children. So we can use these as often as we like throughout the language. So both open and cue notations we want to use throughout the whole interview, not just at the beginning. Direct questions. So now we're starting to move down the traffic light into the orange space. So we only use these questions as needed. So direct questions ask the child to focus on a particular piece of information. For example, where they were, or in Mile's case, if we explored the touching, then we might say, what part of your body did I do the touching to? We should only use if we haven't been able to get the information through open invitations and cue invitations, or for just a simple piece of information like what is this? These questions are interviewer-led, and we may get less narrative and full responses. And research has shown that the information in response to these questions is less accurate and less reliable than when we use invitational questions. Due to being more focused, these questions might be suggested to children, as it's easier to take a guess. So if we look at the example of Millie, what part of your body, she was younger and didn't have the words, she might make up a word that she knows because she feels like she needs to tell the answer. Does that make sense? Whereas if we say, tell me about the touching, she's free to explain about the touching in her own words. We do need to ask these questions sometimes, because if we really have been able to get information from Millie about that, we do need to ask to try and understand it. And so what we could do in that situation, if we said, what part of your body did Uncle do touching, and she says something like arm, straight away we can say, tell me all about that, which is called appearance. That's when we move back up the traffic light as soon as we go into the red or orange section. And that means that Millie would need to explain in her own words about the touching on her arm. And so we would soon be able to see if she hadn't understood the question when she takes the guess. Closed questions. Ask the child to choose an answer or require a yes or no response. So was it inside or outside? Was your brother there? Answers to these questions may be far less accurate, as children may guess a response in order to get it right, as I said earlier. For all those contextual reasons relating to the dynamics of the interview for a child, it's very difficult for children to not provide an answer to these questions or to challenge the question's validity. To say, I don't understand, or what do you mean? It's hard for children. So, use these sparingly and remember to pair by following up with a cue or open invitation. And this will allow the child to qualify their answer with a full explanation. And just give you, running out of time, I'll give you a quick example. So if we were trying to get Millie's body position when the touching was happening, and we hadn't been able to get it by asking her to describe what happened, then we might need to say, were you sitting, standing, or laying, or something different when Uncle did that. And she might say, I was laying. And so then we would quickly come back up to tell me all about that and get an explanation of how she was laying, which would qualify that answer that she's made. Okay, so hopefully, we'd like to show you this in action, but only if the video is working. So we've given you, what we've done is, Marama and one of our other colleagues recorded a little piece of how we would interview a child, and we've given you a transcript of it with the coded questions. So you'll be able to look at the code and the different question types when we watch the movie. the interview, and see how the open and queued invitation questions encourage a lot more detail, while the direct closed questions only get a short response. So, you got it? Okay. So I've left these till last to talk about because we really much will be using them unless absolutely necessary. So we sometimes have to introduce something that we believe has happened. We might have some other evidence, and the child hasn't told us about this freely in their narrative. So these questions need to be asked if they're important to the investigation. So leading questions need to be used very carefully, as they are, the risk is that they are very suggestible. So and it can, and remember it can be hard for children to tell into questions or refuse to answer. So what we'll do is I'll give you a little example. If for example, Nellie hadn't told us about the $10 that she was getting from her uncle, then you would rape her. So that hadn't come up for the whole interview. Then we might say something like, I heard something about Uncle giving money. If Nellie said no to this, then we would move on and leave that topic. Because one, we could actually have that information wrong, or two, she might not want to talk about that, and that is her choice if she is. If she gives any kind of positive response, so she says, oh yeah, what do you think we would do? Any thoughts? Tell us more about that. Perfect. That's what we would do. We would go back up and use Erin to get her to tell us all about the introduction of the $10. And we do these right at the end of the interview. And when your interviews play in court, we do it at the end because if there are any questions around the admissibility of that particular issue, so there might be a challenge around that, and then we can just edit that part off, and it doesn't compromise the rest of the statement that she's making. I gave you the answer up there, look at that. Okay, so use these always with caution. Every time you want to introduce content, think about the red traffic light. You're at the stop sign. And so, well, is there a more open way to ask about this? Have you tried to explore it already? And two, are we right at the interview and is it necessary? That's what Okay, so along with asking good questions, another good interviewing technique is to focus on the action first. So we want to know all about what happened. So we want the whole story from the start to finish, and we leave the more concrete details like where, when, let's right to the end of the interview. So we want to give the child the opportunity to tell the whole story with minimal disruptions from the interviewer, and get a lot of the information from the child in the investigation. This information might be covered spontaneously by the child if we're asking them just to tell us about what happened. So an example using Nellie from the study would be, tell us everything that happened with Uncle from the start to the finish. And by doing that, we might get a lot of the details we need, like how they felt on the body, the injuries, who was there, what was being said, all that sort of information. You don't have to ask those direct questions. So that is the best way to get the information from the child when they're first talking about it and in their own words that they're using to describe what happened. As you'll be aware, children have very limited attention span, so we're trying to get all that important information within a short time frame. And as we've talked about, we're often dealing with cognitive delays, behavioural issues and things as well. So it is a real skill to get that information within that short time frame, and we need strategies and ways to manage that, which is why we have the interviewing model and training. We need to keep our questioning on topic and meaningful. We don't want to be asking lots of irrelevant questions, so we always need to stay on topic because we've got that short time frame, and likewise bringing children back to the topic. If they're going straight over, into something that we don't want them to be talking about, we need to keep them
on track. Once we've covered all of the actions of the offending, that's all we need to make sure we've got all the information we need for the investigation. So thinking about things like any injuries sustained, we need to be asking about the body at the time it happened, the body afterwards. If they talk about injuries, we need to know if anyone else saw those injuries so that we can corroborate that. And also thinking about other things like for the investigation, it could be like using evidence protection or lubrication used, we want descriptions of those packaging, if weapons were used, descriptions of those and where they might be now. So we're looking for anything that can corroborate the child's statement. Obviously clothing and bedding we're also interested in, if there's been any ripped clothing or blood on sheets, that sort of thing. And electronic evidence is really important nowadays. We think about any text messages or photographs that were taken. All that stuff is really important to gather from the child. We also want to know who the first person was that they told. So that's a really important piece of paper. So we cover those details as well.
We're running out of time, but are you happy for us to go for another few minutes? Yes. So as we've talked about, interviewing is a complex task. You probably all think, wow, how are we going to do this? Interviewers need specialised skills to get the best evidence that we can. We've only touched on a few aspects of what makes best practice, what is deemed best practice, and what makes a good interview. To make sure that we are giving our children the best access to justice and opportunity to have a voice in the process, we need an evidence-based interviewing model and a robust program of training and development for all our specialist child interviewers. All the research shows that interviewing is a very difficult task to develop and then to maintain. And without regular training and supervision, interviewing skills will slip and decline over time. In fact, I don't think there's one piece of research that relates best practice to length of interviewing. So it's actually about making sure that you are doing, regularly peer reviewing each other's work, exposed to new developments and that type of thing. So in New Zealand, in response to the research, we've developed a training program that starts with an initial course. So we have some pre-course learning, which involves some study material and also an observation where new interviewers need to watch an interview take place and then they have to answer some questions. So they're doing some talking with the interviewer about what happened before and after to cover some of that content. Then we have a 1 week, they also make a little video themselves because it's quite scary going on video the first time when you do your interview. So we do that in a safe space for them. And they send that in, and then we do a 1 week face-to-face training program. So as I said, all of our OT social, all our mental lead social workers and police interviewers do the same course, and we do it together. So we do a week-long face-to-face course, and then they go back home, and we've set up some kind of mentoring for them. So not all our interviewers are in a space where there's other interviewers present, so they might be in quite an isolated situation. And they might just be a casual interviewer, and it's hard for them to develop and keep their skills up. So we pair them with more experienced interviewers, and they work remotely, so they might use Teams meetings and things to keep in touch. And then so we kind of have, I guess, a space where we talk about a developing interviewer, and then we have the qualified interviewer, and that's once they, so we're in this accreditation process where our team assesses one of and we have we're lucky that we have the interviews recorded. So interviewers can send in their interview and they do a reflection worksheet, and then our assessing team, one of our assessing team will look at that interview and give them a whole lot of feedback, and then we have a standard. So we have a minimum standard. And so we have so if our interviewers aren't quite at that standard, they just need to submit another one in a few months. If they are at that standard, then they have to submit another one in 6 months. So we're just ensuring that everyone is regularly engaging in some kind of supervision, self-reflective supervision. So Okay, I'm conscious we're running out of time. So I just want to do one final exercise with you. Now we do this with judges, lawyers, interviewers, everyone we train for outcomes. Okay, and it's really interesting to see people's responses. So what I want you to do is in your table, just take 2 minutes to answer the question, is a cup sanded in orange? Is a cup sanded in orange?
We were quite torn because we thought the orange is living on borrowed time, and once it's eaten, it's gone. So the orange might be quite stressed thinking that, and then the cup obviously has more longevity. But on the other hand, what were we saying about what was sad about the cup? We've talked about that. So maybe, yeah, we should agree later.
Okay, so okay, second table.
Sorry, so we didn't really answer the question. We thought that it's not the right question to ask. So we went back to asking good questions.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so we saw outside the teacher. So no, that's not a good question given the context. You can't really apply the emotions to objects.
Oh. Now no one else is going to want to answer the question.
I think not.
You can't change your answers.
Okay, so another sort of 2 answers. Okay, the first is they said the cup is sadder because with the orange it has a potential to sort of grow again because of the seeds. So even if it gets used, it's done. My opinion is that's the only one. They both said because at the end of the day, nothing will be squished, will be empty. It's going to be empty. They're both going to be empty and that's it. So they both said.
So another, what age can? Okay, what about you?
We have a lot of answers. You can't. But when it comes to the interviewing of victims, we have to select your question. So that question is, we think is irrelevant.
And what about the CPA? You can't change your answers.
We think the cup is very sad because it's upside down. And it seems like his journey is finished. And the cup is dirty, so we can see some tears coming down on that side. But the orange is very happy. He's got sauce on top. It means that he's very well treated. She's very well treated. And she's got that thing at the top, the green. It means no one pinched it off. So she's very strategically placed there as a very special orange. But the cup, it just put it upside down next to it, finished.
And very detailed ones. Here's what you would like to see. You couldn't have
Well, yes, we did have lots of answers, but we decided that you're forcing us to answer the question. that can't be answered. But we came up with all sorts of answers. Interestingly, we had the same answer as one of the groups at the back. We said the orange will be happier because it has seeds, it can regrow, whereas the cup, once it's broken, it's done. But we also had other answers as to why the cup is happier than the orange. But you forced us to answer an irrelevant question, I think, was that.
Thank you very much for joining in that exercise. So
One more.
oh, I'm sorry.
So we think the answer is there's no answer to the questions. Because sometimes when you interview a child, somebody they just don't answer the questions, or they think the question is not relevant or it doesn't make sense to them. So yeah.
You're right. So it doesn't matter. We don't have an answer to whether it's it's irrelevant, as you said. And my question to everyone who did answer that question was why did you answer that question when it didn't make sense? So why did you answer that question?
It made sense.
It made sense.
Orange on the salsa. Wow. That's I'm special.
Thank you. What else would people answer that question for me? Yeah, defense is the reason. We tried to apply meaning to it because why would we're teaching you something? Why would we ask you a question that's irrelevant? There must be a purpose. Yes.
And that's a very interesting point because what you're highlighting is that when someone is in a position of authority or in a position where they have respect or leadership, there is always going to be a need to respond to that. So you've given us that question, and if we step back, we say that's a pretty weird question. That's actually a question that doesn't make sense. But we've all forgotten that, and we don't know. We must answer.
There must be a reason.
That's human beings. That's not a
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And thank you for that. Really insightful. So the next slide says something like that. Why did you answer that question when it didn't make sense? Although it did make sense in society. I'm not sure I you answered it because we told you to.
Yeah.
And so will the children need. And on that note, long no time.